In the early 1950s, the eyes of the world turned toward Iran, a nation rich in oil, proud of its heritage, and brimming with political possibility. At its helm was a man whose name still evokes fierce pride and bitter controversy, Mohammad Mossadegh. As a secular nationalist and champion of parliamentary democracy, Mossadegh had one dream: that Iran should belong to Iranians, not to foreign powers, and certainly not to corporations. But that dream threatened the global balance of power, and so in 1953, the CIA and MI6 launched Operation Ajax, a covert plot that would bring down Mossadegh, reinstall a monarch, and reshape Iran's future for generations. This is the story of how democracy was overthrown, oil was reclaimed, and imperial interests triumphed, all supposedly in the name of freedom. To understand what happened in 1953, you have to understand oil. Since the early 20th century, Iran's oil fields were among the largest in the world, and they had been controlled by a British company called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Though the oil came from Iranian soil, the profits flowed almost entirely to London. British elites enjoyed cheap fuel and booming revenues. Iranians, by contrast, worked in dire conditions for meager wages. They weren't even allowed to audit the company's accounts. One British memo from the time called the arrangement a jewel in the crown, but to Iranians, it was economic colonialism. In 1951, the Iranian parliament voted to nationalize the oil industry. The architect of that decision was Mossadegh. He was charismatic, fiercely independent, and deeply principled. He was also the scion of an aristocratic family, educated in France and Switzerland. At the same time, he was a populist who opposed foreign domination and dreamed of a modern, democratic Iran. When he became prime minister that April, nationalization was his first act. The British were furious. The Foreign Office declared it an intolerable threat to British prestige. Prime Minister Winston Churchill himself approved plans to sabotage Iran's economy. British technicians were withdrawn and a naval blockade was imposed. Iranian oil was banned from global markets, and Mossadegh's government lost 95% of its oil revenue in a single year. But Mossadegh refused to yield. He declared Iranians would rather eat grass than accept the return of colonial rule. Having failed to bring Mossadegh to his knees economically, Britain turned to the shadows. Initially, their intelligence service MI6 plotted a coup on its own. They reached out to conservative army officers and sympathetic clerics inside Iran. They even discussed funding Shia mobs to riot in the street, a crude attempt at creating chaos. But without boots on the ground, they couldn't pull it off. And then came a change in Washington. In January 1953, US President Dwight D. Eisenhower took office. Unlike Truman, who had rejected earlier British requests for regime change, Eisenhower was open to covert operations. The Cold War had hardened American policy. Iran was seen not as a nationalist uprising, but as a potential communist domino. Though Mossadegh was not a communist, US officials feared that his weakening hold on power and his willingness to work with the Tudeh Party could open the door to Soviet influence. British intelligence exploited this fear. According to a CIA internal history, the British tried to convince the Americans that Mossadegh was turning Iran into a communist state, and the argument worked. In April 1953, the CIA and MI6 agreed to jointly launch Operation Ajax. It would be the first American coup d'etat against a foreign government. The plan was coordinated by Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt and a senior CIA officer in the Middle East. Roosevelt arrived in Tehran with bags of cash and a network of contacts. Over the next 4 months, he worked day and night to destabilize Mossadegh's government from within. The CIA's budget for the operation was around $1 million, equivalent to more than $11 million today. That money was used to bribe members of parliament, pay off military officers, print anti-Mossadegh propaganda, fund street mobs and criminal gangs, and forge documents implicating Mossadegh in communist plots. One fake letter was published in Iranian newspapers, and it claimed that Mossadegh was colluding with the Soviets to take over the country. Another story suggested he had insulted Islam. Roosevelt also pressured the Shah, the weak and hesitant monarch, to sign a royal decree dismissing Mossadegh and appointing General Fazlollah Zahedi as prime minister. At first, the Shah refused, but after weeks of lobbying and under threat of exile, he relented. The CIA had its script. Now came the performance. On August 15, 1953, the CIA launched the first phase of the coup. Colonel Nematollah Nasiri, head of the Shah's Imperial Guard, arrived at Mossadegh's home to arrest him, but the plan was leaked. Loyalist forces ambushed Nasiri's men. The coup attempt failed. Dozens were arrested, and the Shah feared for his life. He fled the country to Rome. Back in Washington, panic set in. The CIA sent an urgent cable. Operation has failed. Discontinue all efforts. But Kermit Roosevelt ignored the order. He reportedly told his team, "We are not done here." And in that moment, the course of history changed again. Roosevelt regrouped. On August 19th, he launched a second attempt, this time using brute force and psychological warfare. CIA paid agents fanned out across Tehran. Some posed as communists, others as monarchists. Street gangs rioted. Newspapers ran fake headlines. Leaflets circulated claiming Mossadegh planned to abolish the monarchy and establish Soviet-style rule. Military units began switching sides, and by noon, pro-Shah demonstrators were marching through the capital. In the mid-afternoon, tanks were rolling into the city center. The headquarters of pro-Mossadegh forces were attacked. The state radio station was seized. Mossadegh's home was surrounded, shelled, and eventually stormed. He escaped over a garden wall, but within hours he surrendered. The next day, General Zahedi appeared on Iranian radio to declare himself prime minister. The coup was complete, and the Shah returned in triumph. Mossadegh was tried and sentenced to 3 years in solitary confinement, followed by house arrest until his death in 1967. He never again held public office, and the Shah, now restored by foreign intervention, ruled Iran as an absolute monarch for the next 26 years. Under his regime, political dissent was crushed. The CIA helped train Savak, the Shah's secret police, notorious for torture and surveillance. Iran's oil industry, though nominally nationalized, was divided among a Western consortium. British Petroleum, Chevron, Exxon, and others gained direct access to Iran's fields, and the Iranian people, once again, were cut out of the profits. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah in a populist uprising led by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Many Iranians cited 1953 as the moment when their democracy was stolen. The United States, once seen as a model of freedom, became a symbol of betrayal. For decades, the US and British governments denied their role in the coup. But in 2000, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright finally admitted what historians had long suspected. She said in 1953, the United States played a significant role in orchestrating the overthrow of Iran's popular prime minister. The coup was clearly a setback for Iran's political development. And in 2013, the CIA finally declassified its internal history of Operation Ajax. It confirmed everything: the bribes, the propaganda, the forged documents, and the secret payments. Operation Ajax was the first major CIA-backed regime change in the post-war era, and it would not be the last.